Modern New York has the Empire State Building, London has the Shard, Dubai has the Burj Khalifa. We think of the vertical race as a modern obsession. We are wrong. 4,500 years ago, a civilization built a skyscraper that defied the laws of physics. They did it with copper chisels and brute force. It stood 481 feet tall. It was the Great Pyramid of Giza. It held the undisputed title of the tallest man-made structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. That is not just a historical fact. That is an engineering monopoly that lasted for millennia. To put that into perspective, the Lincoln Cathedral in England finally broke the record in the year 1311. For nearly 4,000 years, no human on the planet built anything taller than the pharaohs. Europe at this exact moment was a wilderness. While Egyptian engineers were calculating angles to the millimeter, people in Europe were living in basic mud brick huts. The pinnacle of European architecture was the stone mound. They were dragging rocks to build Stonehenge. Egypt was stacking 2.3 million stone blocks into the clouds. The sheer physics of the Great Pyramid are terrifying. You cannot just stack 6 million tons of limestone and hope it stays up. The downward pressure is immense. The weight at the base is enough to pulverize standard stone. Egyptian builders realized this early on. They engineered a gradient system. The largest, heaviest blocks form the foundation. These massive stones weigh up to 15 tons each. As the pyramid rises, the blocks get progressively smaller. At the peak, they weigh less than a ton. They engineered a structural blueprint that shifted the center of gravity downward. Inside the pyramid, the engineering gets even more dangerous. Pharaoh Khufu wanted a burial chamber deep within the core of the monument. This required carving a massive hollow room right under millions of tons of crushing vertical pressure. The roof of the king's chamber is made of massive granite beams. Each beam weighs 50 tons. Soon after construction, the unthinkable happened. The immense weight above caused the granite to crack. The entire internal structure was on the verge of a catastrophic collapse. The engineers did not panic. They invented the world's first relieving chambers. They built 5 shallow spaces directly above the king's chamber. They capped these spaces with a pointed roof made of gabled limestone blocks. This inverted V shape acted as a weight distributor. It forced the millions of tons of overhead pressure away from the flat ceiling. The weight was pushed outward into the core of the pyramid. The king's chamber survived. It is still standing today. Egypt did not stop with pyramids. Centuries later, they took the vertical race to a whole new level. They built the Lighthouse of Alexandria, also known as the Pharos. This was a true ancient megatower. It soared over 330 feet into the sky. It was a multi-tiered skyscraper built on a tiny island in the Mediterranean. The bottom tier was a massive square base. The middle tier was octagonal. The top tier was a cylindrical tower. This was not just a stack of rocks. This was a highly functional, technologically advanced machine. The interior featured a massive spiral ramp. Teams of workers used pack animals to haul fuel up this ramp day and night. At the very top, a massive fire burned constantly. Behind the fire sat a giant, polished bronze mirror. During the day, the mirror reflected sunlight. At night, it reflected the firelight. Ships could see the beam from 30 miles away. It was a beacon of dominant engineering visible from the horizon. The pharaohs faced a deadly enemy. The Mediterranean coast is prone to violent earthquakes. A standard rigid tower would snap under the seismic stress. The architects used a revolutionary technique. They bound the giant stone blocks together using molten lead. This allowed the structure to flex slightly during tremors. It absorbed the shock waves instead of breaking. It survived multiple major earthquakes before finally succumbing 1,000 years later. The pharaohs also loved propaganda. They wanted everyone to know they controlled the sky. They did this through the construction of obelisks. An obelisk is a skyscraper carved from a single piece of stone. They are monolithic giants. Some weigh over 300 tons and reach heights of over 100 feet. The engineering process began in the granite quarries of Aswan. Workers did not use iron tools. They used balls of dolerite, a stone harder than granite. They pounded the rock for months to carve out the shape. The real nightmare was the logistics. Moving a 300-ton stone pillar out of a pit required flawless execution. One wrong move and the stone would fracture. A cracked obelisk was useless. They dragged these monsters to the Nile River on massive wooden sleds. The next hurdle was water transport. The weight of a single obelisk was enough to snap a standard ship clean in half. They built specialized double-hulled barges. They flooded the barges to sink them lower in the water. They slid the obelisk onto the deck. Then they pumped the water out of the hulls. The ships floated back up, lifting the massive weight. The final challenge was the most dangerous. They had to lift this 300-ton pillar from a horizontal position to a vertical position. They did not have cranes. They did not have steel cables. They built a massive brick ramp around a central funnel filled with fine sand. They dragged the obelisk up the ramp until its base rested on the sand. Workers slowly removed the sand from the bottom of the funnel. The obelisk sank into the pit under its own weight. The pivot point was calculated perfectly. The stone rotated flawlessly onto its pedestal. This was the ancient world's ultimate flex. It was a needle of solid stone piercing the sky. It announced the presence of the pharaoh from miles away. While Egypt was mastering structural engineering, Europe was stuck in the Stone Age. The tallest structures in Europe during the Bronze Age were dirt barrows and basic stone alignments. There was no math, there were no architectural blueprints, there was no understanding of structural load distribution. Egyptians were using advanced geometry. They utilized the golden ratio in their architecture. They aligned the Great Pyramid to true north within a fraction of a degree. They achieved this precision using astronomy and basic surveying tools. The scale of this accomplishment is hard to overstate. The Great Pyramid contains enough stone to build a wall around France. The labor force was not a slave army. It was a highly organized workforce of skilled conscripts. They were housed in dedicated cities. They were fed high-protein diets. The entire country was mobilized to support the construction. It was a massive societal machine geared toward a single goal. They wanted to touch the sky. The materials came from all over the kingdom. White limestone was quarried across the river at Tura. Granite was floated down the Nile from hundreds of miles away. The logistical network alone was a marvel of engineering. They dug artificial canals to bring the Nile directly to the foot of the Giza Plateau. They built massive harbors to receive the stone shipments. Every single aspect of Egyptian construction was designed for permanence. They did not build for the next decade. They built for eternity. The casing stones of the Great Pyramid were originally polished to a mirror finish. The structure gleamed in the desert sun. It looked like a solid mountain of light. The accuracy of the joints between these casing stones is baffling. You cannot fit a razor blade between them. They achieved this level of precision across a base that covers 13 acres. The ground beneath the pyramid had to be perfectly level. A variance of just a few inches at the base would cause the pyramid to lean as it grew taller. It would have collapsed before reaching half its intended height. They leveled the bedrock using water channels. They cut a grid of trenches into the rock. They filled the trenches with water to mark a perfect level line. Then they chipped away the remaining stone down to that line. The result was a foundation that is flat to within less than an inch across the entire perimeter. Modern builders with GPS and laser levels struggle to achieve this level of accuracy on large sites. Egypt built skyscrapers before the concept of a city even existed in most parts of the world. They conquered gravity, weight, and time. Their monuments still stand as a reminder of what humans can achieve with math, organization, and sheer will. The engineering prowess did not stop at the Giza Plateau. The pharaohs continued to push the boundaries of height and volume across the entire landscape. They turned the Nile Valley into an avenue of titans. To maintain this vertical dominance, they had to invent entirely new fields of management. A project like the Great Pyramid required a massive administrative bureaucracy. Scribes tracked the delivery of every single block. Doctors treated the fractured bones of the workers. Bakers produced thousands of loaves of bread daily to fuel the workforce. This was a centralized command economy completely dedicated to vertical architecture. The sheer volume of material moved by this civilization is staggering. If you took the stone from all the major pyramids and temples along the Nile, you could build a modern highway system across an entire continent. Yet they did it without the wheel during the Old Kingdom. They relied entirely on sledges, lubrication tracks, and human muscle. They understood friction at a molecular level. Wall paintings show a worker standing on the front of a massive sledge, pouring water onto the sand. This was not a ritual, it was fluid dynamics. The water reduced the pulling force required by nearly half. It allowed a team of men to move stones that should have been unmovable. Europe would not see this level of logistical organization for thousands of years. While the Romans eventually built great aqueducts, their engineering foundations were built on the lessons learned from the Nile. The Greeks studied in Egypt to learn the mathematics required to lift heavy stone. The legacy of these ancient skyscrapers is not just their survival, it is the fact that they set the blueprint for human ambition. They proved that gravity is just a variable to be overcome. They showed that with enough stone, calculation, and collective effort, humanity can conquer the sky.